discuss the very exciting topic of crypto. And while my panelists are joining me here, I just kind of, in case you haven't been reading the news, but I mean, the headlines on crypto today are just incredible. You know, we have headlines like Bitcoin crash sends crypto community into extreme fear. The Financial Times is running a piece about the fact that there's a moral case against crypto. Bloomberg has a story about a massive crypto hack that just happened. So right now is a good time to be talking about whether you, as corporate investors, should even be thinking about having some kind of crypto presence. So I can't think of anything more topical to discuss today. So, but let me introduce the panel. So we've got Jong Choi, who's the head of Europe Investments for Samsung Ventures. Thanks for joining us, Jong. And Nicholas Moore, who's partner at Morgan Lewis and Bockius and has been really busy in the last year doing a whole bunch of crypto deals. So you are really kind of in the know on this. And Samsung, obviously, again, for those who've been sort of living under a rock and haven't been following this, but, you know, are gradually starting to build in some crypto capability into a lot of the products that are coming out. Now, that's not what Jong does, but he does have to take a view as Samsung Ventures in terms of which, you know, new parts of that ecosystem to kind of invest in. So I just wanted to kind of reassure you on the credentials of both of the panelists in terms of they do know what they're talking about. And so I kind of wanted to start us off with just, you know, how worried should we be about the crash? Is this the end of crypto? Why don't you start us off, Nicholas? Because you're right in the thick of this, and you've been doing these deals, and things have kind of slowed down a little bit recently.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. I mean, I'm involved, obviously, as a corporate lawyer, as an advisor, rather than as an investment professional. I mean, last year was incredibly busy. I mean, I think it's important to start at the outset by drawing a distinction between the sort of Bitcoin-type mass media hysteria and blockchain product innovation, which is, I mean, and we'll be talking about both. And what's really interesting is how the former, the sort of hysteria and the bad PR, the sort of permanent hangover that the space has, you know, with it being viewed as, to an extent, a bit of a get-rich-quick scheme, how that affects market sentiment. And there is a knock-on for the sentiment knocks on to product innovation, but actually there's a huge amount going on in the space. I mean, some of the smartest people and most reputable people in the world working on it. And yeah, I think it is a little bit quieter this year, but I don't expect that to be permanent.
So to a certain extent, we have to take that separation between, you know, the kind of extreme end of you know, cryptocurrency speculation, NFT speculation, etc., and then the underlying things that are going on, which are going to happen, right? You know, Web3 and all the applications that we have so we'll dive into that. But maybe, Jong, if you can kind of also kind of tell us what the position at Samsung is generally, and then kind of how you fit into, and your thinking fits into that. And has it been rocked by, again, some of the recent headlines?
Sure. Well, I guess from Samsung's point of view, and I guess the crypto itself would be different for many of us actually sitting in this room. And I guess for Samsung, it actually means in many different things. And as some of you might know, Samsung has businesses in the financial services, but also in consumer and enterprise software and so on and so forth. So crypto itself has been one of the topics that we have seen being discussed internally for past couple of years. And interestingly, I think it first started with our enterprise software business unit, how to utilize crypto into, or blockchain, into like enterprise framework. And then obviously recently, we've had our consumer business unit really kind of trying to embrace or maybe test out this crypto phenomena that we see. So actually early this year, or actually starting from last year, there were some consumer products or the mobile phone that supports the crypto wallet. And this year, smart TV being announced for supporting NFT kind of features as well. So I think these are slowly coming onto the scene. But nevertheless, I think these are very early stage of kind of say testing what it could mean for the consumer products and so on. And to the very latest trends, obviously it would have an impact to what we are doing, but we'll probably need to see a bit more time to see how it materializes.
Yeah. But also when we were talking before this panel, you were sort of explaining the kind of, it's quite tricky for a big conglomerate like Samsung to know what position to take in something where it is a bit of a trend, and so you wouldn't be the first adopters, but you sort of, you want to be a fast follower, or maybe even a medium speed follower. What's the view you?
Yes, I guess so. For many of Samsung's businesses or the products, I guess there are many businesses where we are market leader, and that naturally puts us into the position where we need to say adapt those kind of key features or innovations that's happening in the market, and then trying to adapt that as quickly as possible. But I think more recently, I guess we are being pushed into the position where we need to expand ourselves with this type of new features that's coming out. And I guess one of them is crypto and or the blockchain, and there are many others, including AI and in the past probably 5-10 years, IoT-related topics as well.
Okay. All right, well, let's dive a little bit into kind of, what is left once the kind of extreme froth goes away. And if we think about where we are in the sort of Gartner hype cycle, we've probably had the hype. Now we're rapidly falling into, the kind of the winter period where it is going to be tough. And then out of that, that's actually usually where the kind of the real stuff starts to come out, because then those people who are serious remain in the game. So what are those things that are going to remain? I mean, Nicholas, what do you think will kind of be the bones that will have lasting value?
Well, let me start off by saying that before we get into that, which Jong is probably better qualified than I am to talk about, but I think it's incredibly helpful to have companies like Samsung in the space, because in the same way that regulation, which we'll probably get on to talk about in a moment, that legitimizes the space, I think having corporate VCs as opposed to other types of VCs in the space goes a long way, really, to addressing that sort of residual PR problem that I referred to at the beginning. I think, the spaces that we see, so where we're advising founders or VCs or corporate VCs at the moment, especially gaming, so NFTs in gaming, metaverse, obviously. The big challenge there being interoperability of metaverses. It's not a metaverse unless you can take your NFT, whatever form that has, and move it from one metaverse into the other metaverse. And the challenge there, sort of layered on top of all the other challenges, is that it's not obvious that all metaverses will be on the blockchain. There's lots of good reasons why they will be, but they might not be. It's not obvious that Facebook Meta will be on the blockchain.
Well, they probably wouldn't want to be on the blockchain, because they just like everyone to be on Facebook and use whatever platform themselves as the platform.
Exactly. There's lots of reasons why they might not want to be. So, gaming, and then of course DeFi and fintech.
Yeah. But it's, as you say, Samsung Ventures could, and other corporate VCs could have a really big role in legitimizing that. That's also a huge responsibility. So I'd just love to think about, to understand sort of how you're thinking about it, and what bits of this are interesting. What are you looking at now? Because you're trying to decide which of these truly have longevity.
Sure. Well, I think definitely, I guess recently all these trends with NFT, and I guess NFT was in the media quite a lot, and I think we are seeing many interesting news that's coming out in that space. And this kind of reminds us of, one of the phenomena that we saw, maybe 5-10 years back, which was about kitten videos, which was quite popular on YouTube, and we never knew that YouTube will become such a big platform. Where it becomes more of a kind of entertainment and main information source, and maybe even influencing geopolitical issues these days. And I think that's probably what might be happening with NFT or blockchain space as well. So we are seeing all these interesting contents or use cases being tried out, but I guess that might not be the end form, and it might not be the kind of the big platform that we might see in, say, 5 years or 10 years' time. But within this space, so I guess Samsung as a whole, or Samsung Ventures, I guess it's I would say conservative, but it is big enough to be trying to make a kind of careful bets. And to the prior kind of session, I mean, Samsung is engaging with the ecosystem at different stage of companies. But as a Samsung Ventures, as a team, we are engaging probably more on the kind of mid to late stage companies or the possibilities that we would like to engage with. And for that purposes, I guess we try to focus on those kind of key pillars where we might see would be kind of be required to build such a larger platform. And for us, I guess in the past for the IoT, I guess we focus on the connectivity side of things. When we are looking at the AI, we are looking at cyber security space. And now with crypto and blockchain space, we are looking at the security side of things. So we have invested in a company called Ledger, which is basically looking at the security for consumer and enterprise space as well, which we believe will need it in whichever way this platform grows.
Okay. And just in terms of, just on the topic of legitimizing and kind of having to, Nicholas, I think you could really talk us through what are the kind of remaining legal issues that kind of most crucially need to be ironed out still?
Yeah, I mean, there's we could be here all day and tomorrow and then back at the Shangri-La next week and carry on. The legal issues are just endless, really. So I mean, start at the beginning with the sort of macro strategic issue about financial regulation. Which the sort of paradigm question there, which is being resolved at relatively rapid pace, is Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. Are they securities? And we know they're not, but are some of the other tokens that will be issued securities?
And which way is that going? So is it largely that it's being decided they're not securities?
So I mean, it's jurisdiction specific, but in the UK and the US, the fact that there's no central authority, by definition, because we're talking about blockchain, and there's no sort of profit share, it's regulators in the US and UK are comfortable that those two coins in particular are not securities. So I think provided that regulators can see that there's positive societal benefits to this whole space, and we can also deal with the sort of climate change, fear, uncertainty and doubt, which Green Pixie alluded to in one of their slides, the carbon emissions. I think certainly in the UK there's cause to be very optimistic. Rishi Sunak said in March that he was hoping to make the UK a crypto hub. So we're on the right lines in the sort of strategic layer, I think. The big question, and the one that we're wrestling with at the moment, is where's the governance and the transparency and the sort of safety net for consumers? Because needless to say, if you buy a share in a company, you've got the support of hundreds of years of case law and essentially you know what to expect. You know you'll get a voting right, or should do, and you know you'll get an indirect interest in the economics. But with a token, you may be getting nothing. The token is only as good as the programming in the token, which you would only be able to understand if you're a very sophisticated coder. And then on top of that, it's only as good as the explanation in the terms and conditions, and are they accurate? And what's the fallback? The fallback here really is just the law of contract, and that's not, I don't think, sophisticated enough to deal with some of these issues. So, there is no corporate governance because by definition these aren't corporates. The investors are corporates, but the projects we're talking about by and large aren't corporates. And so there's that whole space which is going to allow, it's good news for my colleagues and I, because it's going to allow for lots of creative lawyering in the future. Yeah.
But then, Jong, how are you sort of approaching it? Again, knowing that if you are investing in a project where, there's so many open questions like this, how much does that bother you? Are you then trying to get put in some sort of better governance?
I think in terms of governance, obviously as an investor, we try to strictly follow all the kind of the fundamentals of as a board member and as a shareholder of those companies. And as you mentioned,
maybe we need to turn up the
mic.
The volume a little.
Yeah, sorry, I tried to speak up.
Yeah, there we go.
Sorry. Yes, and for many of these crypto-related engagements or the projects, we try to employ more of, kind kind of careful governance, especially going into consumer-related products and so on. And that's one of the reasons why I mentioned about one of our investment, which was focusing around the security side of things. Again, this is one of the key kind of elements that we see would be required for the governance issues and regulatory issues. What is the limit and what is the extent of security that we might need and we might need to provide. So hopefully, from your point on, we can expand into more other areas, but we think that is probably one of the good first step for us.
And it's very application specific, obviously. So if the project that the corporate VC was looking at was sort of back-end architecture underpinning a DeFi exchange, then the issues, it's less about governance, it's more about data protection, for example. But if, at the point at which you sell a token to a consumer, then it's governance and transparency all the way, basically. So it's very much depends what type of project you're looking at.
And just again, sort of to take a bit of a more macro view on this, but we've seen a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of brands have kind of, tried out a couple of metaverse things, or they've got some NFTs, and But have you seen anything? Then maybe Jong, you're best at starting us off on this. But have you seen anything that you think has some real traction or interest, or are these experiments just kind of petering out and not really going anywhere?
I think it's still hard to say. I mean, it's very early stage of experimentation, as you said. I think this is probably what many startups might say, like proof of concept stage of the business. So they are trying to experiment with many contents, many of services, and at the end of the day, I guess for the brands, it's about the engagements with the consumers or the users and trying to see how this will impact their kind of actual current main business lines. So I guess we are looking at many of like popular consumer brands or the fashion brands trying out these metaverse ideas. In some cases, even selling some digital-only clothing and so on, which they claim could be a market size of $1 billion. But obviously, they are sitting on much larger business, and they hope that their main business can be kind of lifted by all these user engagements. So yeah, I think we are still at very early stage, and it's very hard to say which kind of way it will go. But we also definitely believe this is one of the way that many of these things will happen. I think this is kind of evolutionary step of technology innovations. I mean, we've talked about IoT for, 10 to 20 years now. And then we have talked about AI innovation, which I think it was shown in one of the slides, but it is one of natural building blocks of what we need to see. And then we also talked about metaverse, but again, all this is needed, including the blockchain and those type of decentralized systems. So we see it as a more evolutionary kind of progress.
Okay, so it sounds like a bit of a wait and see. I guess, we're almost coming to the end of the time, but I'd like to kind of, if you are a corporate venture fund that hasn't really gone into this space and you're now looking at these terrible headlines and you're thinking about whether, and you've just heard Nicholas say that there's a lot of legal questions, but I don't know, what would you advise? Do you think it is a moment to jump in and try this out regardless of those worries?
Yeah, I do. It's especially if it's not consumer facing, because then I think it's much safer. But even if, so I think if you're in an industry which represents one of the sort of paradigm applications that you would use a blockchain for, so financial settlement or corporate registrar, just good examples of what you use a blockchain for. I think it's essential. I think if as a sort of the correct exercise of directors' duties, it's advisable to be looking at it, even if you decide not to do it. And I think the volatility. I mean, the volatility is, I guess, and this isn't my area of expertise, but the volatility is just partly reflects the fact it's an emergent industry, and there is a level of, going back to where we started, but there is a level of explaining the volatility. So it's the volatility to an extent is informed, or the price fluctuations are informed by the Bitcoin halving. We know now that the prices of all tokens track Bitcoin, and there is an element of predictability within that. So the uncertainty can be managed, I would say.
Okay. Yeah. So you should, so be experimenting and looking at it, but maybe not on the consumer-facing side. What advice would you have, Jong?
Well, I think the quick answer is yes. I think for many of us or many industries that are in this room would be good to kind of monitor the trends, and if we're possible, even make an investment. I think it's probably similar to what we discussed about the big data in 5 to 10 years ago. I guess it was coming out, and it was a new concept, and we were all talking about it. And I mean, I guess these days, most of the industry or the companies are being influenced by how big data is shaping up or influence their business lines. Yeah. So I think blockchain technology, in one way or another, it has a potential of impacting the current kind of business models or business itself. And it would be good to have some anchor kind of investments or interest into this whole trend so that you can monitor what might happen in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, so you still need to kind of build your sort of stake in that. And I guess it's kind of good to hark back to, I think it was Saul Klein's presentation yesterday, where he reminded us that, after the dot-com crash, nobody ever thought that an internet company would ever IPO again. I mean, there were a large contingent of people who said, well, that's all done with, and I don't have to bother with that. So, taking that same view that sort of crypto and blockchain is now something that you no longer have to worry about because it seems to be on the downturn is maybe not the right conclusion to draw.
Agree with that.
All right, but we seem to be out of time, so I am going to say thank you very much for sharing that with us and reassuring us a little bit.